about home. Yesterday, just to give you some idea of the relevance of yesterday's decision, James' statement that Jill just described made two things that are directly relevant to Cold Spring. In talking about traffic, she described it as the calamity that cannot be overstated. We referred to the traffic on Route 9 as a result of North Star and Cold Spring as a nightmare, right? The nightmare on 9. Calamity, nightmare, same thing, they apply. She also referred to how that traffic would place a burden on the overall transportation network if they improve Atlantic Fields. We believe the same thing is true at Cold Spring. Okay, so she made that case, and 3 of her 4 colleagues specifically referred to her statement in saying why they voted for the way that they did yesterday, to deny the application. So we think that this has relevance for Cold Spring. Cold Spring is really Atlantic Fields on steroids. It's that much larger. Its projected daily vehicle trips towards the bottom half of the slide is 33,359 Atlantic Fields, which is 26,000. Right? Cold Spring has 2/3 of the commercial and other use space, whereas Atlantic Fields had 665,000. So Cold Springs has about 2/3 of that kind of space. But in addition, it has the projection of 5,000 residents who would be living there in 20 years, occupying the 1,922 residential units that would be there in 2045. Atlantic Fields would have had no residents. One difference between Cold Spring and Atlantic Fields is that Cold Spring traffic impact is affected by what's called internal capture, and those are trips that the residents would make within the community instead of going out onto the highways to go shopping on Route 1 or someplace else. And it also has the impact of drive-by shoppers, pass-by as it's called. So in the case of Atlantic Fields, there was no impact from this internal capture, which reduces the overall traffic effects. Okay. Both of them have a broad impact on the traffic network. It was specifically pointed out at Atlantic Fields that there were going to be 22 other intersections beyond just the immediate ones affected. A similar number in the case of Cold Spring, all the way out to Route 1. And so the impact is not just right in front of the development, but it's in the entire area nearby. Route 24 has already been widened. So the traffic impact there was considered too extreme for that location. In the case of Route 9, it has not been widened out as far as the area where Cold Spring would be, nor is there any plan afoot in place to widen it. So there's no prospect, there's no way we can figure out the timing of when the capacity would be expanded to be able to accommodate that. And the final difference is that Atlantic Fields was within the Hinlopen Transportation Improvement District. Cold Spring is not within that district, it's outside. So we do think that there are some factors of the Atlantic Fields decision that have a direct application to Cool Spring. And SPC has been spending an enormous amount of time, and I think that is the correct adjective, enormous amount of time. I'm looking at Rich because he knows how much time. I know how much time he's been spending on, and Johannes as well, Johannes there. So we've been spending an enormous amount of time evaluating the traffic. We are going to come up with an analysis. We will share it with the public. We'll share it with the Cape Gazette even, in terms of what we consider the bottom line traffic impact to be at Cold Spring. And we hope that will be part of the public discussion about this. So just to give you some idea, we are working on it. We're monitoring when the timing is going to be. Expect to hear more from us in the upcoming weeks and months, maybe. We don't know how long it's going to last. And but we're remaining active on this issue because we think it has significance in the long run. Thank you very much.
One other, maybe two other announcements. I'm gonna let, where is Allison? Cover this one.
Can you hear me? Izone County Council is holding an information training and discussion session tomorrow here at the library over in the medium conference or meeting. For those people who aren't aware, Izone County Council is a group of volunteers who, closer?
Yeah,
Sorry. Izone County Council is a group of volunteers who attend and observe at county council meetings. We observe, we take notes, and we let people know what happened at county council meetings. Our goal is to be aware of land use decisions that affect the public. And another goal we have is to let county council know that the public is interested and aware of those decisions that they are making on behalf of we the people. So our information meeting is tomorrow at 10:30 over here beyond vending machines. And so if you have comments or suggestions or are curious, would like to know more, please come. Everybody's welcome. Thank you.
If you want to get more involved with Census Preservation Coalition, this is a great place to start by getting involved in the Izone County Council. And I just want to add that Izone County Council was the first group or the first person to let us know that council was considering changing the process or the policy for their public hearings. And so we got on it right away, but it's because of this organization we got a jump start on. So please consider joining this effort. Let's see. I think this is Shine a Light is a series that's going to continue with a public interview with Matthew Ritter, Director of DENREC, Division of Parks and Recs. This is taking place on January 29th at 5 o'clock at the Lewis Public Library. And the main focus is to make the work of local, state, and federal officials more transparent and open to the public. We talked about Belmead. So now I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to talk about our accomplishments in 2025. We're starting a new year. So what is it that we got done in 2025? When it comes to strengthening the organization, we developed a vision and a strategy, which we just love doing. We purchased and installed financial software. We developed and created a land use committee, which has done a tremendous amount of work on Cool Spring and other projects. We also now have a legal committee, and they have been such a great help helping us interpret what the law says and what we can and cannot do. We've organized and hosted the Green Gala. Many of you were there for that. I think we raised around $28,000 and we're able to donate 7,000 of that to the Center for the Inland Bays. EOCC became a part of the coalition, and then we recruited Allison White to be part of our board. Outreach, we now have about 300 new members this year. We organized and hosted an evening with Doug Townley, many of you there for that. That was an awesome event. Coast Day, which is this picture here, up at the university campus here in Lewis. Sussex Government 101, that's the program that we run to help people understand how Sussex County and the state of Delaware work, because if you moved here somewhere else, it's not like anything I've experienced in the 4 states I've lived in. We attended the meet and greet at the Bethany Beach Landowners Association. We participated in Greenwood Day, Ellendale Family Day, and a Sierra Club Forum. And these are not all of them. These are just some that I pulled out. Advocacy, we talked about North Star, Cool Spring Crossing. We participated in the Land Use Reform Working Group. We had people that would come to every single meeting. The Office of State Planning, State Policy and Spending, we participated in responding to that. Coastal Corridor Study, likewise. Spotlight Delaware, we participated in their legislative summit, and again already this year, their conference called Shifting Sands, and we also hosted a listening group with them. We have members, particularly Joe Pica, who are part of Rethinking Delaware, Sierra Club, Climate Action, and DENREC. Now, what is it that you all noticed about all of these accomplishments? Anybody? People. It's people, the wonderful people that we have met and have worked with to get all of this done. And no matter what we do, it's always about people. And it's about people who speak up for those that don't have a voice, including the woods, including the wetlands, including children and all of the animals. None of those accomplishments that I showed you would have been possible without you, because it's the fact that the public is engaged and shows up at hearings and shows up at these meetings and talks to their council members. That's how all of this got done. And so please just give yourselves a round of applause. 2025. So congratulations to all of you and thank you. And now what I'd like to do is we're going to turn it over to Danielle Swallow. Let me just give you a little bit of an introduction here. Danielle provides technical assistance and outreach to Delaware communities on building resilience to weather and climate hazards. She is co-founder of the Resilient Sustainable Communities League, a professional network organizations dedicated to helping communities thrive in the face of a changing climate. She is also active in advising communities about land use practices and disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Danielle is a 2022 recipient of both the Mid-Atlantic Sea Grant Award for Outstanding Outreach and the University of Delaware College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment's Community Engagement Award. She has 25 years of climate and coastal policy and planning experience. And I would just like to add a personal note. If I had been the one to assemble the Land Use Reform Working Group, Danielle would have been at the table. Please welcome Danielle.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to meet you. And I'm wondering if I should advance slides. That or
I think they push the down button.
the down
But
button.
I wouldn't expect.
Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. I am a coastal hazards specialist with Delaware Sea Grant. And while the slides are coming up, I'll just tell you a little bit about Sea Grant. I'm based at the Lewis campus for UD. And Sea Grant is a federal and state funded program that works to connect people to science and information in support of resilient communities and healthy ecosystems. And by the way, Johannes, that's your picture. No?
No, I just, no.
Anyway, let me go back to this. Okay, this is the slide I was speaking to. So, yeah, we're focused on healthy ecosystems, resilient communities, environmental education, and I'm on the extension side. So I work with communities, like Jill said, to help them build resilience to weather and climate hazards. And I do that through outreach like today and technical assistance and capacity building. One of my technical assistance efforts recently was working with the state as a technical climate advisor to the production of the state's new climate projections, which is what I'm going to talk in part about today. My goal is not to debate whether climate change exists, okay? I'm going to represent sort of the body of knowledge that the state is putting out with regard to these projections and to kind of walk you through and summarize that. And then I'll talk some about land use planning's role in climate. So first I wanted to talk to you and just sort of explain the difference between climate and weather because people confuse these definitions a lot. But weather is your short-term conditions that you look out the window and they're as measured by hours, days, minutes even, sometimes a couple of weeks. Whereas climate is an average of your long-term weather conditions over time. Often within, over 30 years or more, decades, millennia, things like that. We live in different climates within the US and our wardrobe kind of indicates, the climate that we live in. So people in Arizona are going to have potentially a different wardrobe compared to people up in Vermont, right? But that doesn't mean that on a day in April, someone might not wake up in Arizona and realize that the temperature outside is similar to what's in Vermont on that particular day. It means that one of those states is having some sort of temperature anomaly. But overall, the climate is still the same because that's an average. Okay? When people refer to climate change, there is natural climate variability and sort of human influence variability. But most often people are referring to climate change as the broader long-term shifts in our climate due to global warming. And global warming is kind of the long-term warming of the earth due to more heat entering the system than leaving it. And what we're designed to basically have about 30% of the sun's energy leave our planet and radiate back out to space. And they do that by radiating out and bouncing off the ice and our clouds and so forth. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've had more fossil fuels generate and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that's trapping heat, more heat than we're normally meant to, and so that's why we're warming. And this is going to be very simplistic summary, but the science community to sort of project where climate is going and how things are changing, they basically look at past conditions, so the historical record, and they look at present day conditions out there in real time. And they merge that with sophisticated models that simulate a big grid around the earth that represents different physical processes, that simulate the interactions between the atmosphere and the ocean and land cover like forests or ice sheets. And so all those different physical processes are being simulated. And then on top of that, scenarios are developed to imagine a future state. What's going to happen in the future? And so these scenarios come up with examples where, okay, they imagine how much emissions of greenhouse gases will continue to go into the atmosphere. And they might also imagine what might happen to the different physical processes as the planet warms more. So for example, what might happen to the ice sheets and the stability of them. those are the scenarios, and then they're coupled together, so the scenarios are like an algorithm of different representations of the future, merging with the models to produce projections. I don't want you to dwell too much on the graph there, that's an old graph, but I'm using it to just show you that here, this is depicting 3 scenarios of climate indicator. And the different colors represent the range of that scenario. And the dark line through the middle is the median, 50% probability. So climate projections are often expressed as a range. And these are not predictions because we simply can't determine with finality what will happen 60 years from now in terms of how the global community will band together and whether they will be more aggressive for climate greenhouse gas mitigation. We don't know for sure, what will happen as the Earth responds to a warming climate in terms of the ice sheet stability. There's still some uncertainty with that, even though we have a lot of certainty in other areas. And so that's why we get into these ranges and scenarios. The top red one is sort of the worst case scenario, right? Where you kind of predict that there's going to be unabated emissions and a lot of warming. And then the lower scenario is your more optimistic scenario where there is more active mitigation going on. I want to emphasize that uncertainty doesn't give us a reason to just give up or to not believe the climate projections. Because we live with uncertainty all the time in our lives, right? You might, they might predict rain on a given day, but there's always a chance that it may not rain. And if you play the stock market, you can't predict with 100% confidence what's going to happen to your stocks, 3 months from now. And so what you have to do is you have to pay attention to the indicators and you have to go with the best available information. And that's what we do in the climate field. And that's what all of us at a community level would do, is we work with the most important and relevant and recent information, and we adapt as we go. So now I'm going to pivot and talk about the actual projections the state has released just at the end of 2025, last year. This is the first time that temperature and precipitation indicators have been updated since 2014. Sea level rise projections have been updated since first time since 2017. So here, so by the way, this report is available online. Will show both historical trends as well as the future projections. So historically, we've seen an average annual temperature increase of 3 degrees since 1895. Delaware is actually warming faster than the national average, interestingly. And we project that annual temperatures will increase by another 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century and 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. Again, these are expressive ranges, right? Because they're based on different scenarios. So the lower end of the range has the confidence that there's going to be more aggressive mitigation of greenhouse gases that will slow the warming and then hence the impacts. And then the upper end of the range is sort of the less optimistic, where greenhouse gases kind of go unabated. There's more warming and hence even more rapid impact. It's interesting that we see an increase in temperatures through most of the seasons except autumn, with winter showing the greatest seasonal increase. And so that means we may have warmer winters. In the summer, we're going to see hotter days and hotter nights. By nights, what I mean is nights where the minimum temperature doesn't go below 75 degrees. And so what that means, that's going to have a lot of implications for people because, you need cooler weather to really cool down and really recover from the heat of the day, particularly if you live in a home without AC. This also will also be a number of days increase that are over 90 degrees. Depending on the range, that's 35 to 75 days more than we see now. So outdoor workers, will especially be vulnerable to that, as well as our older adults and other sensitive populations. So there's all kinds of implications for that to pay attention to. And there's also upsides, right? Our growing season will lengthen, and that presents interesting opportunities. And precipitation is kind of a weird one for us because in Delaware, our annual precipitation rates are highly variable. So the annual average could vary by 20 inches or more from year to year. But we can see that overall our rainfall has increased 3 inches since 1895. And another 2 to 4 inches is projected by mid-century. But interestingly, beyond that, it doesn't go up considerably more. The greatest seasonal increase will be in the winter. So warmer winters and wetter winters, maybe not so snowy. And we also see evidence since 2000 that rainfall events have become more, extreme in the sense that greater rainfall over a short rate of time. And we expect that to continue with about up to a 25% increase in the days that have half an inch of rain, and similarly days with a 1 inch of rain or more. And so we need to pay attention to our infrastructure, right? Because we may see more wet weather, more rain coming down a short amount of time, so our stormwater infrastructure will need to accommodate that. And now I'm going to spend a couple slides on sea level rise. Sea level rise appears as an increase in the average height of our tides. And our rate of sea level rise is influenced by both man-made factors like global warming, which increases the heat in the ocean, and a warmer ocean expands more. And then there's natural factors like land subsidence. And the state has 2 tide gauges that are considered the authoritative source for tide and water level information. It's used by the state and the federal government. That's at Reedy Point up north and Lewis. So you're going to see a lot of my data charts referencing Lewis, and that's really a guide for all of this area of Sussex County. The top chart shows the mean sea level observation-based trajectory for Delaware. So we've seen that our sea levels have increased in Lewis 15 inches since 1919. But that rate is accelerating. And you can see the acceleration begins right around 2000. The science community took the observed sea level rise, and then they extrapolated that same curve out to 2050. Then they compared it to the models and what the models showed as happening in 2050, and they align very well. So there's high confidence that between now and 2050, that we could expect about a foot, 0.25 to 1.5 feet by 2050. So another, good foot or so. And that means our tide will be higher. The low tides are going to be higher, our high tides are going to be higher. And our wetlands and our creeks and our rivers are going to be storing more water if they're tidal. And naturally, we also see a correlation in our minor flooding incidences. That's the bottom chart, which is showing the number of days that water levels reached or exceeded the Weather Service threshold for minor flooding. They set this threshold about 1.35 feet over mean high water, which is like the high tide of the day. And that's sort of the threshold at which they say there's likely to be some minor flooding in the Lewis region. This doesn't mean that every property is going to see it. That depends on your elevation and other characteristics of the property. But that's the threshold that's used by the government to kind of see when we're reaching certain extremes. And it's a minor extreme, because this is minor flooding. There's moderate flooding thresholds and major flooding thresholds as well. You can see an exponential increase in the amount of minor flooding that's been occurring since, I think, about 2000 or so. And those trends will continue also as sea level rise advances. So right now, this is the current track showing our sea level rise projections. We're using a low, intermediate, high, and a high set of scenarios. With high being sort of unabated, worst case scenario, your low is a really optimistic scenario. The good news is that our current observations from now, even extrapolated out, are tracking closer to the intermediate low, okay? And that means the rate of change is more modest than it would have been with the higher scenarios. That trajectory is accelerating, and so we do anticipate that it'll start tracking toward the intermediate scenario by 2050. But then after that, we see more divergence in the scenarios, and you can see that on the chart, how the scenarios begin to pull apart. And that's because really of these different assumptions we have to make about how unstable the ice sheets are. That's still a body of work that is actively being worked on to better understand the rate of sea melt from the ice and how, structurally stable it's going to remain. And also, of course, with emissions, like the rate of emissions going into the future. We are advising the communities, and this can include our consultants and engineers and state agencies, to use intermediate low to intermediate high for planning purposes and design of infrastructure. The high is really your worst case scenario, but we don't feel that the confidence is there. We have higher confidence in those scenarios. And so you would choose those scenarios, like if you were making improvements to an important piece of critical infrastructure in a town, you might want to make sure you're not assuming you're not accepting too much risk, and you're going to design to the more conservative scenario, which would be intermediate high, because you don't want to under design, right? You want to make sure you're protecting your community with that infrastructure. By 2100, following kind of that methodology, the state projects sea level rise between 2.53 feet and 5.2 feet. So that's significant. And this is a slide I borrowed from DENREC. They've recently released a climate action plan for the state. And this is, I think, is taken from one of their presentations. And it summarizes some of the impacts that we might see throughout the state. But I'm not going to, read off each particular impact. But I do want to, leave you with a particular takeaway, which is that we are going to see more extreme weather, and we could see more compound events, which are those events where you have more than one event occurring at roughly the same time. So, for example, you could have high tide flooding, coupled with a storm event that brings that storm tide in, and then you have more major flooding. Or you could have a heat wave going on at the same time as a drought. And then you kind of have a twofold, situation. But I also want to say that there's good things that happen too. There's opportunities here. That we are going to see areas where economically businesses can innovate. And in terms of how we respond and adapt. We're going to see maybe potentially less of a need for heating gas and oil and propane in the winter months, because we'll have warmer winters. We're going to see a longer growing season, and so there are things that happen on the positive side that we can leverage. But flooding, particularly for Sussex County, I think is a big issue. And these are the projections going out to 2100 of the number of high tide flooding days based on at the lowest tide gauge. And it's showing you an exponential increase. That's because anytime you see an increase in sea level rise, there will be an exponential result with high tide flooding. And so we're going to be approaching daily extreme tides by the end of the century. So what does that mean? It means potentially a new flooding regime for Delaware. We have to think about living with more water. The paradigm is going to be changed. Our floodplain is going to be changed. This is a quote from the Climate Change Projections Report. The persistence of minor flooding without significant need or input from weather systems puts Delaware as transitioning into a new flood regime, and it should be included in climate smart planning, building and maintaining coastal protections and infrastructure development, and natural resource and agriculture management. May I have you? We can see. Yeah, they're close at the library. And this was such a good point I want to make, so I know.
May I have your attention, please? The line will be closing in 15 minutes. Please bring your materials to the circulation desk to be checked out. Thank you.
So, okay, that's really depressing information, but I really want to emphasize that now is the time to innovate. And there is room and space to do that. We'll never have more choices than we have right now. Our choices will never be cheaper than they are right now. And with change comes opportunity. And one of the areas I think that we have great opportunity is with land use planning. And it's why the state climate action plan dedicated a whole chapter to land use planning. Because it can be incredibly impactful for climate resilience. Why? Because land use planning occurs on a landscape scale. It's not parcel based. It's really more, it's crossing census tracts. It's encompassing a whole county in some cases, right? So the impact can be that much greater. It creates co-benefits that benefit the local economy, improves the environment, and creates societal benefits like cleaner water or cleaner air. And I want to emphasize this, it avoids damages to property and to life. The more we build resilience into our land use planning. What is land use planning? It dictates where we site properties, how we build and design our communities. And that could directly influence resilience. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce came out with a report where they said for every dollar invested in preparedness and resilience, we save $13 in avoided damages and in economic savings. And if we think about it, when developments occur today, and maybe they occur in locations where we wish they wouldn't occur, that risk is passed on to the buyer. And the person that sold that property doesn't have that risk any longer. But who inherits the risk of our placement and the design of that parcel and that community? It's us, the community, and us maybe the responsible parties for infrastructure. So I want to advocate a bit for these best practices that are in our field, and this is coming out of the U.S. Climate Alliance, but it's in the field of resilience planning, which is to really stress the need for location efficient development. Here in Sussex, we'll often hear it talked about in the context of density, I guess, but there's some good truth to the need for density. There's a need in a smart growth fashion for some infill and co-locating more facilities with residential properties, so you have closer access to food and health, resources and that kind of thing. And why is that good? Because that denser development will decrease land disturbance elsewhere. It'll reduce impervious cover elsewhere, and it'll reduce driving distances. Now, I do a lot with disaster response and recovery, and I hear often from the emergency response community how worried they are about the distances and the time it takes to make their calls. And this kind of efficient development will collapse those driving distances and help make response more efficient. Plus, the folks that need that assistance can get to their health care facility or hospital in time, can get access to the resources they need. It's also really important to be preserving our natural and working lands. And that's because we need to allow proper functioning of our floodplain. There's nothing better than the natural floodplain for harnessing the excess energy that the sun puts out and for absorbing excess inundation and moving water from one place to another. There's nothing better. Our engineering solutions try to mimic it, right? And they do for a lot more cost than nature gives us. The more we can protect the natural floodplain, the better. And there's a multitude of benefits that occur by protecting these lands. We're gonna, accrue benefits to air quality, water quality, and habitat, flood protection, and those kinds of things. Plus, we're doing a service to carbon storage as well. unfortunately, I don't hear these things talked about in the context of, okay, so yes, we want to preserve natural lands or forests, our open space. We want to, promote density. However, often it's not said in the same sentence as, but you have to avoid development in high-risk places. Because if we're doing that density in or near the floodplain, and you look at some of the data presented today, what does that tell you? It tells you that our communities are going to bear greater costs going into the future, and that we're putting more population and more development in the path of exposure to our greatest hazards. That hazard increasing. So it defies logic to put more people and infrastructure in those places. But when you look around the country and you have $billion disasters, it's largely because those are locations that have more people and infrastructure, happen to have also high exposure to a hurricane or wildfires. We're creating the conditions for that here. So we need to really promote climate resilient development. Development that avoids high-risk places, that invest in nature-based solutions. That's our buffers, that's our forest cover, that's our living shorelines and bioswales. And we need to generate really new architectural designs that enable us to live more with water, that enable us to adapt to extreme heat. And there are examples around the world of communities that are trying to do just that. And we can take inspiration from places in the Netherlands and from places in China and Germany and so forth. So there's a call to architects to come and bring your best ideas to the younger generation. Bring your best ideas. Maybe we're going to have floating homes. I'm not kidding about it. Maybe we need some floating roadways. Maybe we just have to rethink how we design and build our communities. And above all else, if we start insisting that all climate projections need to be integrated into plans and designs, that becomes a fabulous starting point for climate resilient development. Imagine if an applicant who comes before a planning and zoning commission has to show how their application doesn't increase exposure to wind or to flooding or to extreme heat, and that it reduces vulnerability. That's a game changer in my opinion. So I'll leave you with this quote. Human settlements have been designed in a way that reflects the climate of the past, and this increases the likelihood that disaster-related losses will continue to rise. But my final thought is, but there's time and space right now for us to make meaningful changes, and we just need to act now. Thank you very much.
Danielle, thank you very much. Now I think you understand why I would have loved to have had Danielle on the land use reform working group. She would have been a great asset to it.
I was on the wetland buffer group, and I know what that was like.
Another reason to be there. If you have questions for Danielle, raise your hand. Here we have one right over.
Hey Daniel, it's really great to meet you, and I love your positivity and optimism. I was a Rhode Island Extension grant senior agent. So doing what you did, but back in the 80s, when the huge issue back then was non-point source pollution and how it was affecting the Narragansett Bay and drinking water supply. So my question to you is, so I worked at Rhode Island Sea Grant as a new extension agent. And at the time, we were addressing the impacts of non-point source pollution in the 80s, rapid growth development, and so forth. We created a course, 12-week-long course. 3 communities were involved in this one the watershed area. And believe it or not, it was a town, we didn't have county government providing it, it's the town councils. Every single town council member and every single member of the planning commission in these 3 communities, and about 80% of members of the conservation commission attended this course. the most difficult part of the course was the logistics, or figuring out when all these commissions could actually meet, which I actually remember was Wednesday night from 6 to 8. But we covered a whole suite of topics, as you can see, with climate change and land use and so forth. As a result, and it's very hands-on, we have all the different state and local agencies, we have scientists, we have all kinds of people addressing all the different topics, and a lot of case studies. Every single town reversed land use decisions that they didn't realize what they were doing in terms of impacting not only coastal water quality, but also the drinking water quality. Could you see, given the complexities and interrelated relationships of climate change, with land, transportation, everything, possibly Sea Grant tallying up with your IPA or UD or whatever to deliver similar kinds of things? Because it's a pretty heavy thing with the county councils delivering these upcoming land use decisions. Just wondering, because it's very hands-on, it's a very complicated issue, and I know there's a lot of fear here with regard to private property rights and so forth, but equipped and weaponized with this information, I'm just wondering if Delaware Sea Grant can do a similar thing.
Thank you. That's a really thoughtful question. I will say we have a version of that that's like a lighter version. We do a class called Flood Ready Communities every May. And we do have our mayors attend that. We have council people, planning commissioners. It's only a 3-hour course. So I take your point, like it's not as deep a dive as your multi-week course. And that I could imagine that being tricky with the scheduling. But yeah, we do that. And we have other pilot efforts. We're doing a disaster housing initiative now. But yeah, the whole topic of resilience is a complex topic, and there's lots of components to it. So I'll do some thinking on that, but how we might broaden that out to take a deeper dive. Thank you.
I'm asking this for my own personal understanding. So the impact of sea level rise, like in the water, I live like a block from the Union River Bay. Now, is that impacting it to the same degree in terms of the water table?
Yes, yeah. So the water table is rising as well beneath us. And then because your tides are getting higher, you're going to see encroachment further inland over time. It depends on the elevation and gradient of the land, but there is potential for encroachment. So that potentially there could be expansion of the floodplain.
And I'm a gardener, and I've been trying to understand why my garden is not doing as well as I first did.
I know y'all want to satisfy. Anyway,
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much. Really, you're a state treasure. But my question is a couple of things. One is insurance related, because if you're going to motivate people to take the steps that they need to prepare for what is really inevitable. I mean, you're looking at that chart there. Some people may want to put their heads in the sand. It's coming. It's not. It's when. And we're the front lines of the coastal community here. We are starting to undertake now our comprehensive plan. One of the first in the state that has to use the new law that was passed, requiring us to account for climate impacts. So a couple of us on the planning commission got a briefing the other day from the Institute for Building and Home Standards, IBH. And it was an item. They can give a requirement or they can give a designation of a home that is fortified. And that's a term of art there. And but if insurance companies are not either requiring homes to have that before they'll insure them, or giving them a big break in order to do that, and all your neighbors' houses are getting flooded, but you have taken the steps that to ensure that it is not, the neighborhood is still pretty shot. And there are all the costs that you were talking about. The municipality of Lewis has got to bear a huge amount of costs for emergency services, BPW, I mean, so it isn't just the individual homeowners impacted. It is community, as you said. Anyway, my question is, how do we, what do you see the future for insurance playing a positive role in this going forward? That's the question.
Well, first off, I was supposed to be the recipient of a $3 million FEMA bird grant. I was told I was being awarded it to do a cost benefit study of the cost benefits of building codes, more modern building codes in our state. Our state doesn't have a uniform building code, and we actually get dinged by FEMA.
Are these guys part of BSEX? Is that what's down?
No. So that's one thing on the side. Insurance, I don't think the climate signals have hit our area yet in terms of the insurance. And unfortunately, there's so much demand for homes being constructed, water amenities means closer to the water and stuff like that. I would like to see a market created where we market our primary bedrooms on being on the first floor and granite countertops is something that adds value to a house. But imagine if you had resilient design integrated and you were in a resilient subdivision that could be monetized in some way. I think, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but it would lower insurance premiums. So I'm coming at it a different way, where you monetize and create that market to lower in other states, the insurance market has raised their premiums, right? Which they started in Delaware to deny coverage to manufactured home communities in certain areas of our economy. But it just hasn't hit I don't know all the answers to that.
I have to apologize, I did take that picture, it was at one of our recent floods and very, very kind of you, that's my picture, so. So I went to the wind symposium at Indian River High School on Thursday. And some members of the Delmarva business community proclaimed that there is no climate change. And the gentleman who lives down in Oak Orchard along the Indian River Bay proclaimed that there was no sea level rise. He's lived there for 50 years and there's no sea level rise. To me, what's interesting, what I want to mention to you is it's a little harder to prove climate change than that it's man-made, given everything blow up. Sea level rise is kind of like using a ruler. And if you want to argue against what the ruler told you, then there's no hope for conversation period, right? So is it possible, I know that the science community frequently has boundaries where it can't head too far into political activity and partisan stuff, but if you could package right for here, for Delaware, the basic facts in those curves, you have a pretty you fit a curve to the data, it looks pretty consistent, it's pretty smooth, right? If you can package that data so that the public here can consume it, nothing beats doing public pressure and doing at the ballot box, as we know. Package it for the public and package it for the decision makers, right? Because the message, you have the information, but the message is coming through muffled. The majority is still not there yet. So if there are venues in which you can do that, along with externalized costs and monetizing ecosystem services, right? The pro and
Yeah,
con.
we definitely need more cost studies on the benefits, the economic benefits, for example. I would love to see more of the economic benefits of nature-based solutions here in Sussex, with Sussex examples, and other, hazard mitigation activities. But yeah, that's a good point. Like I'll refer to, to sea level rise as just an increase of high tides, right? That's because that's something that high tide, everyone understands what a high tide is and a low tide is. Increasing rates of erosion, some people are willing to talk in terms of, I see more erosion, but I don't see sea level rise. Well, okay, but there's kind of a correlation there. But yeah, it's like you say tomato, I'll say tomato, and I'm never going to fully convince certain people, right? But yes, having to adjust our talking points, saying the same thing is slightly different. Yeah. But
One of the things that all towns and planning commissions and developers use
are the FEMA maps for floodplain. Now, we are 11 years since we've had an update in the FEMA maps. And I don't have a lot of hope that we're gonna see those soon, and even if we did in our region, New Jersey's gonna kind of head Delaware. So my question is the state or is the university looking at giving us some update on the 100 year and the 500 year? Because right now, our decisions, it's the only thing we have to request of development. Where are you on those? But that data is so old. We know it's changed, but we don't have anything to go on with the 2030.
Yeah, so the FEMA floodplain map is the regulatory standard, even though it has its flaws, and even though in our case it's outdated. But we can't touch that, we can't replicate that and then expect you to use that in a regulatory way because we have a lot of liability. And we get in trouble with the federal government. However, you know, years ago, the state created what they call the FRAM tool. Unfortunately, they used it for the state strategies for spending, even though it's built on very old data. LiDAR data, which is kind of like elevation data from 2005, really old stuff. The state has not created a new product. So what the state would need to do, or UD, is take the base map of the FEMA floodplain and then incorporate other features into it. But it's actually much trickier than it sounds because sea level rise is built upon different datums and stuff. So, and the floodplain is all historical and not future looking. And so you kind of get into some weirdness when you try to merge the two. The thing that I use for future I use it as an inundation map. It's the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. You just Google that, and there's a feature that allows you to click on local scenarios. You click on the Lewis tide gauge, and it brings up the scenarios. They're pretty approximate to ours because we built our methodology on NOAA's. So you can use that, and it'll show you inundation at 1 foot, 2 feet, 2.5 feet, and on increments. And I use that for flooding, so it's not the regulatory map, but I think it's a good base map. Sorry,
I have two questions. The first one I think is pretty big answer. I'm sure.
Sorry, can you say
I have two questions. One is, I think, pretty simple in answer. The next one's not so sure. First question is, does the sea level rise reflect the expansion of water due to the increasing temperature of the environment?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. The second question is, what's the state legislature's receptivity to the information that you and other climatologists and the like are developing? Are they accepting, acknowledging what's coming?
So I'm not part of an advocacy organization, so I don't go to the state legislature typically unless they're looking for like a briefing, factual briefing. There's definitely members that are very receptive, and then there's others that are less receptive. But we also have a governor that's quite receptive and is actively talking to those elected people about different resilience initiatives. So, I mean, it's a little both, I think, on the state legislature side. I wanted to get to you. I'm sorry that you had to wait. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I don't know about everybody else in here, but our insurance is sure gone.
That's okay.
Our insurance is sure gone up a lot. And what they do now is they tie your deductible to the value of your house. So as the house price increases, the value of the house increases, your deductible increases. So where you might have had a $1,500 deductible or a $2,000 deductible, now you have a percentage of the value of your house, which I can tell you, well, we had an $8,000 flood in our house, insurance paid $1,300. So the other thing they tell you to do is to cut down the trees so they don't fall on your house. Meanwhile, and they have a point, we lost our house in a tornado, we get 31 trees fall on the house. So, they do have a point, but insurance has gone up considerably. The other thing is the international building we in the public use does not require hurricane stress. The southern building code, which we used to use, does require building straps or hurricane straps. So there's a lot of things that are like, you know, we can't see them. We have them because we started building something. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you've lived a lot of things I talk about. Nothing prevents a community from going to higher standards. So whatever the base legislation is, or the standard is, hurricane strap, there's nothing that prevents a community from setting policy to higher standards than that. Look at what Lewis has done with freeboard. You know, they recently increased their freeboard even above the minimum freeboard they have. They're going to higher standards. They're taking a proactive, stance to minimize sort of the long-term liability and risk in the community. I have one right here.
Yes. Sorry to say, building standards are minimal. Nationwide, for the most part. A good, foreseeable situation with rising tide. Just take pictures of Sandy that came through here. I think you'll see what's in the future.
Yeah, and I'm actively working on a project called Flood Vision, where we partnered with Climate Central. We collected imagery around the coastal areas of the state. And that imagery will show different buildings and intersections. And then we're going to use AI and our projections and superimpose sea level rise on that picture, coupled with certain storm events like Sandy, to show what, just a representation of what the impact will be. And we're going to be giving that over to our municipal partners. It's meant for municipal and county planning and state planning, not so much for the personal homeowner, but it's for them to use as an outreach tool and a planning tool. So that'll be coming out sometime this year.
Well, I'm thinking about the importance of storytelling, and it brought to mind, I don't know if you can talk about the Brasco Summit, mention it, but that's one of the things that I came out remembering was people when they were telling their stories of working with you and other people like you with their communities and the benefits that they got from them. That those are the kinds of things that seem to have such a big impact on the audience, and we've had so many successes, I'm sure. But to be able to get those stories out to people, I think can move a lot of minds.
Yeah, and you've been such a champion of storytelling. I'm so glad you brought up the Rascal Summit. So the Rascal is the statewide network for climate and environmental resilience, and we have more than 24 state agencies, nonprofits, and organizations that are part of it. But we host an annual summit. It's March 5th. It's at the Dover Dell Tech Center. And the theme this year is land use. We have Smart Growth America coming to speak as our guest speaker, but we'll have success stories and for presentations. We hope you'll join us. You can go to DERASCL, it's RASCL.org/summit.
We'll try to get a slide of that up every for February.
You were encouraging nature-based solutions, which I think is a great idea, but unfortunately in practice, that doesn't seem to be the case. And a good example of this is the Sussex Conservation District that has 15 stormwater practices that developers can use. Of those 15, I think 8 or 9 are nature-based, but developers almost unanimously use stormwater ponds instead of using those. So how do we encourage developers? How do we encourage architects? How do we encourage builders to look at these nature-based solutions if they're not forced to use them?
I think it starts with not treating stormwater ponds as an amenity in your community. People want to live by the water. They can't live by the ocean or the bay. They'll have a nice pond with the spouting down. But that's not gonna do, much favor to your community, and it gets up to my point about, we have to create a groundswell of interest in buying homes that have these nature-based solutions as part of the neighborhood or of the area adjacent to the neighborhood, where we begin to monetize through our own demand for what we're willing to pay for in our homes and our communities. We can monetize those features where they become selling points. And then I think the developers would listen to them. You change the rules, yes.
Hi, I just wanted to mention to the gentleman in the back who asked about the interest of the state legislature in climate change and climate change solutions, and they have been very receptive and active. And in 2023, we passed, Delaware as a state passed the Climate Change Solutions Act, which has goals, 50% reductions by 2050 and net zero reduction, actually got that wrong, net zero emissions by 2050. So they were strong goals. And there's also been the Nature Conservancy sponsored legislation and we passed that requires planning bodies like our Sussex County Council to take into consideration the impacts of climate change on every development. But the problem with both of those big pieces of legislation is implementing them effectively. And, we see from the big view, Johan said something about the sort of anti-wind faction. We've certainly experienced that as these arriving institute has been incredibly effective at misinformation and disinformation about climate change. And we have really strong headwinds in terms of actually putting teeth into what the legislature would like to do.
Hi, Rich.
Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much for being here. Go back to the question the gentleman from Lewis had referenced a comprehensive plan. So the state will require incorporating the climate change in the comprehensive plan. Can you help us understand if it's left to the county considering versus specifically what it is that the state wants the county to incorporate in their plan relative to climate change?
Your question is, what does the state want the county to put in the plan?
What should, if it's left to the county just to consider it, they'll say we consider it. Right?
Yeah.
What specifically, what are there prerequisites? I know that the checklist for the comprehensive plan is 3 or 4 pages long. It's very specific.
Yeah.
Will it be that specific in terms of what it is the county needs to address relative to climate change in the 2028 comprehensive plan?
Yeah, I wish I could say it would probably be specific enough that it needs to be, but here's what I would want. I would want there to be a vulnerability assessment in the plan that considers the vulnerability of properties and demographic groups, compared to these climate effects, like how they're going to be vulnerable to those climate effects. And then identifying vulnerable areas. And then I wanted to identify remedies. So land use and zoning, corrective actions that could reduce exposure and reduce vulnerability. So there's really a very simple component of understanding risk, and it's those two things: reducing exposure and vulnerability. And addressing, coming out with specific strategies that do one or more of those things, and that particular tie it to these climate projections would be, I think, really impactful.
That's helpful, thank you. We'll need that.
And I'm available, right? I can provide technical assistance to communities to help them think through how to do that.
That's an excellent recommendation.
By the way, we just had, I know we're probably getting long on time, but Sussex County is participating in this pilot effort run by the State Housing Authority, looking at disaster housing. So flash forward, there's an inevitable disaster that hits somewhere in our county at some point. It's gonna happen at some point. And what do you do with people that are displaced because of damage to their homes? And it's not so much in the immediate days of after the event, because you have shelters and motel vouchers, but it's more like in the weeks and months. You know how long it takes to rebuild, especially with our affordable housing shortage, right? Where do people live? So I wanted to just commend Sussex County because the state, and I'm working with the state on this, they chose 3 towns, Lewis, Milton, and Georgetown, to participate in this pilot effort, but Sussex County also expressed interest and they're participating. And we had this great exercise last week where we had the towns drawing on their maps of their municipalities. What parts of town have most exposure to flooding? What has most exposure to extreme winter weather? And then, okay, which demographic groups in that area might really be especially impacted? And then what parcels could we look at in town where we might house trailers and, alternate housing on a temporary basis? I think like the fact that Sussex was participating to me was really encouraging, and it, and then they actually said, look, we should have a briefing on climate, at council. It might be good because the climate projections are out. There's something here that's brand new, that's factual information that would support any comp planning process or any decision-making process, whether it's at a municipal level or county level.
I have a question, Danielle. With sea level rise, how will that impact those that live inland? What is the impact of your salt water pushing in towards the freshwater aquifers and water tables?
Yeah, there's different impacts. So you can have saltwater intrusion, where some crops, agricultural crops, will experience saltwater intrusion through roots, if not the overland flooding, if they're near tidal. You can have septic systems also getting saltwater intrusion in those communities that have them. Think about the water table just being higher. That's essentially meaning that your land has less absorptive ability for even heavy rainfall to settle and endure. So there's impacts like that. There's more to it. That's what's in my notes.
So it's not just people on the coast that are vulnerable to sea level rise.
Correct.
If I could just think about this, and look, I'm a geologist, I moved here recently from New York. And so when you raise sea level, it raises the rivers as well, right? The rivers are running into the sea. And so when you raise sea level, it backs that water all the way up the rivers. As far as the rivers go, the whole river backs up a little bit, less and less as you go in, but the whole river backs up. And what the river is where the water table hits the surface, right? So when you raise the river, the whole water table is connected to that. So everything under the ground is going to go up as that river goes.
Yeah, that's really good. And reading point is the upper tide gauge, and we can see, right? There's observations that show like they're experiencing sea level rise as well. It's all here.
I was just curious what the status is on communities like that. Are they all, and is somebody working with Sussex County communities to make sure they're meet FEMA standards?
Are you talking about NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program?
Yes.
Okay. So Sussex participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. What Sussex does not do is participate in the Community Rating System, CRS. That's a program that FEMA uses to incentivize communities in adopting more resilient practices. It could be outreach, but it could also be land use and zoning, types of practices. There's a whole menu of options available to them. In our state, we only have one county that has bought into CRS, and that's Newcastle. The other 2 have not, and then we have a number of towns that participate, including Lewis and Milton. And I think it's a missed opportunity because not only for participating in it, which means that you're taking extra steps to be resilient, but your rate holders for flood insurance receive a commensurate deduction in your premiums. And so their savings passed on to the insurance holders. And so that's a question to ask the county, there's a NFIP coordinator at DENREC who would be very glad to work with them on that.
I have a question, which is about Sussex relative to all the many other counties in Delaware. Yeah, so Sussex is the only county that allows construction in the 100-year floodplain. The other counties do not.
Kent County has some of that too. Newcastle is the most aggressive on that. Yeah.
It can allow some.
Yeah.
And so it happens that we have a growth zone all along the bay, in the bays. And that growth, and that presumably that's an area that's susceptible to the 100-year flood. Is there some systematic way that we could halt construction along the 100-year floodplain, which is inevitably going to become a problem area? Or is that impossible because of the value of that land and the development that can go on?
Well, I mean, it can certainly happen if there's the will of the county and to pass that policy and create a zoning overlay or an ordinance that would prohibit, development. And there's different types of prohibitions. There's outright prohibition of development in the floodplain, or there's sort of a denial of the use of fill, because fill is often used to enable properties to construct in the floodplain, whereas they normally wouldn't get that certificate of, to go ahead and build. If you deny the use of fill, or you say you can't put any net fill in, that's other ways of restricting it. It takes public groundswell and the endorsement of the county. What was your other question? Oh, the cost thing? Well, look, I think we do need more studies that point to the cost to properties and infrastructure of not doing that. FEMA does have something called the National Risk Index. And unfortunately, they recently buried it. It's harder to find, but it has information about, what's it called? Economic, estimated annual losses of infrastructure, includes agricultural land, includes the loss of people based on different hazards. And that could be a starting point to show the cost values of damages, should there be like a hurricane or tornado or, whatever, but like in that case, it would be hurricane or a tropical storm or nor'easter.
We also have severe repetitive loss areas and repetitive loss areas. And that's something that's really great information, because you can use SROs as repetitive loss areas to try to minimize and avoid increase elevation, relocate, or not allow.
Yeah, and the county's been reluctant to partner with homeowners on repetitive loss, like applications to FEMA. And I think we've had more instances of documentation of that, but it's not being fully reported.
The big issue we keep running into when we try and stop development near the water is the takings issue, property rights. And any kind of advice we could give on that would be very helpful.
I think there's all sorts of examples around the country where communities have successfully prevented development in the floodplain. So there's lots of, I think, legal cases and legal justifications that can be drawn.
Has the modeling that you group been doing included tornado risk?
What model?
The effects of climate change.
Oh,
You mentioned it on
Yeah.
rainfall.
yeah. So tornadoes, there is information in the climate projections report about more extreme weather, right? And we know like extreme weather, like tornadoes can be spun from thunderstorms, from hurricanes and that kind of thing. We also know that Tornado Alley is moving eastward. And I attribute that to why we're seeing more tornado activity. I spoke to the state climatologist not too long ago, and he said it's not quite a trend that we could say is a trend yet, but we're beginning to see, data that would seem to indicate that we're moving toward a trend in once the years in our state. But it's hard to project that, right? But what we can project is, look, we've got warmer ocean temperatures, so that creates more evaporation and water vapor in the air. For instance, that will fuel more rain events and hurricane. Not that it creates more hurricanes, but it can facilitate more rapid intensification of hurricanes. And it can also slow them down, and we know hurricanes can spawn tornadoes. But yeah, as far as like being able to say, yes, this community will have 4 by the 2100, no, we're not there.
Oh, we had one. We had 2.
Great one in Western New York.
Well, we just wanted to go for 5 years ago, because Roy our house, it's one over 2 years ago in Bridgeville, Allendale, Greenwood.
I have a question back here.
It seems to me that when the developers fill in the 100-year floodplain, that what they're actually doing is changing the floodplain.
Yes.
Yes, and diverting that water from where it would be down further downstream. And I would really hope that our council people, particularly down like in District 4, would become to understand that when we fill in a floodplain up here, that we are encouraging the flooding down in Dewey, et cetera. Would you agree?
I do agree, because two things, I think that, look, the developer is gonna say, well, this is being engineered to compensate for the runoff or the displacement of water, and it's true, but the stormwater regulations that they're following don't factor in climate change for starters. So it's based on historical data, which is now becoming, kind of outdated in terms of kinds of rain events and things that we would expect to see. Maybe just left my other point. Oh, the other point is it doesn't think about cumulative effects. So, for that reason, I would say, yeah, and I work with communities, there's communities along 54, like towards Selbyville, that are in the unincorporated part, so they're in the county and they're seeing so much more flooding. They attribute some of that to development that's occurring elsewhere. And it's just been hard getting attention, and help with that. But yeah, I think that development has a cumulative effect, but there's nothing mandating that anyone looks at it.
So, we're gonna wrap this up. Danielle, thank you so much. We'll have you back, and I'm sure we'll continue to ask many questions, going forward, and particularly with the comprehensive plan coming up. Thank you. Oh, can I have a little slide back for you? Our next meeting is February 11th. Thank you. And thank you for being here.
I just wanted to make a